Hello everyone. Some men carve their names into buildings because they want to be remembered. Cameron Ellison put his name on a house that was never really his. On Thanksgiving morning, he flew to Manhattan with another woman and left behind the second phone he used to hide the life his pregnant wife was never meant to discover. By the time he came back, workers were already prying the bronze Ellison House letters off the gate. The bank had frozen a $25 million loan, and his wife had left him one sentence he could not talk his way out of. Stick around until the end, because Natalie didn't get free by losing her composure. She got free by sharpening it. Subscribe for more stories about family, courage, and consequences, and let us know in the comments whether a house can still be called a home once someone turns it into a weapon. Our story opens as the first screw comes loose from Cameron Ellison's name. The new owners had asked that the plaque come down before nightfall. Cameron Ellison stopped short at the black iron gate as a raw Atlantic wind blew snow across the coastal road. Two licensed contractors worked from ladders beneath the bronze lettering that had spelled out Ellison House for nearly 7 years. One gripped a drill. The other set the first metally into a padded crate. Cameron stared past them at the gray-shingled mansion overlooking the shoreline. Every window was black. What new owner? The property manager walked toward him, tablet tucked under her coat. A sheriff's deputy stood near the driveway, not confrontational, just present. The Harbor Grace Foundation closed on the purchase earlier today, the manager said. The deed is recorded. Your attorney was sent the court order regarding access, along with the inventory of your belongings. Cameron smiled the way people do when they think someone else has made a paperwork mistake. My wife can't sell our marital home without my consent. This property belonged to the Dawson Family Trust before your marriage. Independent Title Counsel confirmed the trust's authority, your signed waiver, and the judge's temporary order granting exclusive possession. I can't let you inside. He walked to the front door and pushed his key into the lock. It wouldn't turn. He tried again, forcing it. Metal ground against the new mechanism. Through the glass, Cameron could make out the shape of an empty entryway. The long Thanksgiving table was gone. The wedding portrait no longer hung on the staircase wall. In the nursery, thin winter light fell across the bare spot where Ivy's crib used to sit. No Natalie. No suitcases. No cream-colored blanket stitched with the name Ivy Grace. Just rooms emptied of the warmth he had always mistaken for compliance. A sealed document pouch sat inside a weatherproof box near the gate. Inside were his old key, a copy of the recorded deed, a storage inventory, and the white place card Natalie had set beside his Thanksgiving plate. On the back, she'd written 8 words, "You forgot your phone." I remembered what was mine. Cameron's face hardened. Where's the device? The deputy answered. The second phone was handed over to state investigators, with a signed receipt. Your attorney has the paperwork. Cameron's work phone buzzed in his pocket. 14 missed calls from the bank. 9 from the board. 2 from his chief operating officer. A new text from Paige Holloway sat at the top of the screen. Please tell me Natalie never saw the After Ivy files. He called the bank. The loan officer spoke first, before he could even ask what was happening. The proposed $25 million facility is on hold. The collateral package is under fraud review. We've preserved every communication and notified outside counsel. That house was the primary asset. It was never company property, Mr. Ellison. The foundation used a documented purchase option, finished an updated review, and closed through escrow once the court order was entered. Any dispute goes through your lawyers. The line went dead. Behind Cameron, another bronze letter dropped free of the gate. For years he'd treated his own name as though it conferred ownership. Now every turn of the drill stripped away another piece of the story he'd sold to investors, employees, and himself. 3.5 weeks earlier, that Thanksgiving morning had started with apple pie and a promise Natalie still wanted to trust. Natalie Grace Dawson Ellison was 36 weeks pregnant. She moved carefully between the island and the oven while the ocean pounded the rocks below the house. A rosemary turkey browned under foil. Sweet potatoes sat in a blue ceramic dish. Apple pie cooled on the windowsill, filling the kitchen with cinnamon and butter. 3 places were set beneath the chandelier, one for Cameron, one for Natalie, and one small plate between them for the daughter due just before Christmas. "Our first Thanksgiving is 3, Natalie murmured. Ivy shifted under her palm. Natalie had learned to read numbers before she ever learned to spend money. Her mother, Evelyn Dawson, had run a small regional construction firm and made Natalie work summers in estimating, payroll, and the field office before she was allowed anywhere near management. Natalie later became a real estate risk analyst. She understood covenants, title exceptions, and the gap between revenue that actually existed and revenue that had only been promised. 5 years earlier, when Cameron's coastal development company nearly collapsed, Natalie was the one who found the inflated contractor invoices and the lending covenant his own team had overlooked. She rebuilt the cash flow model and connected Cameron with the investor who stabilized the business. A magazine later called the turnaround the Ellison Instinct. Natalie's name showed up only in a photo caption, as Cameron's supportive wife. At first she let it go. Her mother was sick, the company was fragile, and the marriage felt bigger than getting credit in public. Then Cameron started using her absence from the spotlight as evidence that she'd never really belonged in it. Her contacts became his. Her analysis became his gut instinct. When she questioned a deal, he told her the pregnancy had made her risk-averse. When she flagged something that didn't add up, he told her she was anxious. By the time she finally got pregnant, after years of trying, Cameron talked about her as if she were something both precious and helpless. He sat in on her appointments and answered for her. He told friends she'd stopped driving out of nervousness, though she drove every single day. He took over the household mail so nothing stressful would reach her. Natalie noticed each of these things on its own. She hadn't yet seen the pattern they added up to. The click of dress shoes crossed the hallway. Cameron walked in wearing a charcoal suit, silver cufflinks, and a cashmere coat. A suitcase stood beside him. His work phone was in one hand. A smaller, personal phone sat near his half-finished coffee, half hidden under a folded newspaper. "I have to fly to Manhattan," he said. Natalie looked at the suitcase. "An investor might be pulling out of Harbor Ridge this morning. If I don't handle it today, we could lose the whole syndicate." "You told me no calls until after dinner." "I said I'd try." "That bag looks packed for more than a day. The weather might push the return flight back." Natalie glanced at the table. "Will you make it back tonight?" "Of course." Cameron crossed the room and brushed her cheek. His tenderness always showed up right when he needed her resistance to feel unreasonable. "You're doing that thing again," he said. "What thing?" "Turning stress into a crisis." Dr. Morgan said you need to manage your anxiety. What Dr. Morgan had actually said was that some anxiety was normal after a hard pregnancy. Cameron only ever repeated the word anxiety, using it to make every question she asked feel smaller. "I'm asking when my husband is coming home," she said. He rested his palm on her stomach, and Ivy shifted away from the pressure. "Everything I do is for both of you." Cameron kissed her forehead, grabbed the suitcase, and left through the garage. His driver's car pulled away past the gate. The house went quiet except for the oven fan and the ocean below. Natalie turned toward his coffee cup. The second phone lit up under the newspaper. She could read the first notification without even touching it. "Paige Holloway, she still thinks you're coming home for dinner." A second message appeared before the screen went dark. "Paige Holloway, did the notary sign off on the postpartum authorization?" Natalie's hands went cold. She knew exactly who Paige was. Paige had been hired 18 months earlier as vice president of special projects. Cameron praised her efficiency constantly, traveled with her often, and waved off every question as jealousy. That first text confirmed the affair. The second one hinted at something planned. Natalie didn't unlock the phone. She photographed the visible screen with her own device, stepped back, and called Mara Whitfield, the attorney who had handled Evelyn Dawson's estate. Mara picked up with holiday music playing behind her. "Natalie, happy Thanksgiving. I need you to listen before you say anything." Natalie read her the notifications word for word. Mara's tone shifted immediately. "Don't touch that phone. Don't delete or forward anything from it. Put it somewhere no one else can get to it. Has anything shown up recently from a lender, a title company, a clinic, or a notary?" Natalie glanced at the sideboard. A courier had dropped off a document envelope the day before. Cameron had told her it was routine insurance paperwork and buried it under a stack of holiday mail. It was addressed to both of them. "There's a package with both our names on it. You're allowed to open mail addressed to you," Mara said. "Film the sealed envelope, the label, and everything inside as you take it out. Don't write on any of it." Natalie started recording video. Inside the envelope was a lender's closing checklist for a $25 million credit facility. Their coastal home was listed as collateral. The checklist claimed the bank had already received Natalie's notarized consent, a trustee resolution, and a medical capacity letter stating that Cameron could act on her behalf if she became unavailable. Natalie had signed none of it. A copy of the supposed consent form was included. Her signature looked convincing until she studied the capital D in Dawson. The lower curve was too rounded, the pen pressure too even in places where her real hand always lifted off the page. The notarization was even more obviously wrong. It claimed she'd appeared in person in Boston on a date when she'd actually been at an obstetrics appointment in Portland. The capacity letter carried the letterhead of a private clinic she had never once set foot in. It described pregnancy-associated paranoid ideation and recommended Cameron oversee major decisions after the birth. "This isn't just about the house," Natalie said. "No," Mara answered. "Keep going." The trustee resolution proposed removing Natalie as acting trustee of the Dawson Family Trust for 90 days and installing Cameron in her place. Attached emails referenced a folder labeled after Ivy. One message told Paige to arrange a bed at a private wellness facility. Another discussed filing for emergency custody if Natalie pushed back. A typed household schedule showed Paige moving into the coastal house before New Year's Day. Natalie pressed a hand flat against the counter. The affair hurt in the ordinary way betrayal hurts. The documents brought something colder. Cameron didn't just plan to leave her, he planned to replace her, and use her pregnancy as the cover story. Ivy kicked hard. Natalie had seen the words after Ivy once before. 2 weeks earlier, Cameron had left a handwritten note on the counter, moved Dawson files to after Ivy before the December review. When she'd asked what it meant, he'd called it an internal project label and kissed her, as though her curiosity were sweet but unnecessary. She'd let it go at the time, because arguing over every small oddity had gotten exhausting. Now that same phrase sat next to a forged medical letter and a plan to strip her of her trustee role. She walked into the dining room and looked at the small plate set between the two adult place settings. Its innocence hurt worse than Paige's text had. Natalie had treated that little plate as a promise that fatherhood would soften Cameron. Instead, he'd treated the birth as a deadline. Mara asked her to describe the room, the envelope, and the order in which she'd found each page. Natalie spoke slowly and stuck to what she'd actually witnessed, no words like conspiracy or crime. The envelope had been addressed to her. The signature wasn't hers. The notary's date conflicted with her real medical appointment. She'd never set foot in the clinic named in the letter, and Cameron had never once asked to replace her as trustee. "That's enough for right now," Mara said. "Facts first. Conclusions later." For years, Cameron had won every argument by reaching his conclusion before anyone else had even entered the room. Something in Natalie settled as she realized she didn't have to copy that. Being careful could move slower and still get where it needed to go. "I'm here," Natalie whispered. Mara heard her. "Sit down. I'm calling local counsel, the lender's fraud department, and the police." "Don't confront Cameron." Just hold on to your ID, the trust documents, the prenup, and your medical records. We'll let people outside this marriage check every fact that matters. What happens to the phone? Natalie asked. An investigator will decide whether there's legal grounds to take it. You don't touch it. What if he comes home first? He thinks you're cooking dinner. Let him keep thinking that, just for a few more hours. The Dawson Family Trust had owned the coastal property since before Natalie's marriage. Her mother had also negotiated a purchase option with the Harbor Grace Foundation, a nonprofit planning a residential and legal aid center for women facing financial coercion. Evelyn had delayed the sale once she got sick, but the option still stood if the trust ever chose to exercise it at an independently appraised value. The prenuptial agreement had been drafted by separate attorneys on each side. Cameron had waived any claim to the trust property and agreed that if a court ever granted Natalie exclusive possession on the basis of abuse, threats, or fraud, he wouldn't stand in the way of a lawful transfer. Mara warned that the wording still needed review under local law. A trust and a prenup don't let us skip the judge, she said. They just give a judge and a title company something solid to work from. That afternoon, a state detective arrived wearing a body camera. Natalie showed him the phone, still sitting on the counter where she'd left it. He photographed the lock screen notifications. After checking with a prosecutor, he took the device under a written property receipt, while investigators sought further legal authority for a full forensic search. He separately collected the lender's envelope and preserved it. The bank's fraud unit confirmed that digital copies of the disputed documents had come in through the company's outside loan broker. The bank froze the file before its credit committee ever met. It wasn't announcing a crime. It was preserving its own records and opening an internal review. Mara set up an emergency appointment with Natalie's obstetrician. The doctor confirmed that no one at the practice had diagnosed paranoia, questioned Natalie's capacity to make decisions, or authorized Cameron to direct anything about her postpartum care. A hospital social worker helped Natalie put together a confidential visitor and safety plan. She alone would decide who could enter her room, within medical and safety limits. Any dispute over Cameron's parental rights after Ivy's birth would go through family court. We don't settle custody with a hospital visitor list, Mara said. And we don't let him settle it with a forged letter, either. Natalie nodded. Then we go to the judge. The emergency hearing happened that Friday afternoon. The judge reviewed sworn statements, the backdated clinic letter, the disputed notarization, and the messages visible on the phone. Cameron appeared through counsel out of New York. His lawyer argued the documents were only drafts, that Natalie had misread routine estate planning, and that removing Cameron from the house before a full hearing would be unfair. Natalie's attorney asked only for limited, temporary relief, no direct contact, no entry to the home, no use of the disputed documents, and exclusive possession for Natalie while everything was investigated. The judge granted a temporary order and set a date for a fuller hearing. Nothing about ownership, guilt, custody, or divorce was decided yet. It simply drew immediate boundaries while the evidence was tested. Cameron was served at his hotel in Manhattan. The order also required both sides to preserve their financial and electronic records, and barred either of them from moving disputed marital assets beyond ordinary expenses. Natalie's attorney walked her through every restriction before she agreed to any of it. The protective order wasn't permission to drain accounts, cancel Cameron's health insurance, or use their children as leverage. It was a temporary structure meant to stop immediate harm. Natalie opened a new checking account for income that was hers alone, left the joint funds untouched, and kept a careful ledger of every household expense. The trust's bank added in-person verification and a second required reviewer for any transaction above a set threshold. Credit bureaus flagged fraud alerts once investigators learned copies of Natalie's ID had been used in the false notarization. A security consultant preserved the estate's camera footage and logged every export. A locksmith inspected the property but waited until the deed was officially recorded and the possession order was active. Every step left a paper trail. A date, a person responsible, and a reason. That discipline frustrated Cameron's lawyers, because it left almost no room for the dramatic accusations he preferred. Natalie hadn't destroyed his things. She hadn't hidden their daughter. She hadn't posted anything online. She'd used courts, attorneys, escrow, medical records, and investigators, institutions that could just as easily have disagreed with her, if the evidence had pointed that way. His first message to her came through his lawyer. "She's tearing our family apart over a misunderstanding." Natalie didn't answer. A licensed inventory company entered the estate under supervision. Cameron's clothes, watches, personal papers, sports gear, and other separate property were photographed and moved into secure storage. His attorney was given access instructions. Anything jointly disputed stayed untouched pending an agreement or a court order. Natalie took her ID, the trust records, her medical files, 6 tiny outfits for Ivy, and a cream blanket embroidered with her daughter's name. Every piece of jewelry Cameron had ever bought her stayed in the safe, listed for the lawyers to sort out. "I don't want him saying I ran off with his property," she told Mara. "He might say it anyway. Then the record will answer him." Harbor Grace didn't rush the closing. The foundation ordered an updated appraisal, a structural inspection, an environmental review, a title report, and written proof of funds. A separate attorney met with Natalie without Mara present and walked her through her options. She could keep the estate and fight the forged lien in court. She could put the sale on hold. She could wait until after Ivy was born. She could look into refinancing that had nothing to do with Cameron's company. Every option was real. So was her answer. "My mother wanted this place to be useful," Natalie said. "Cameron wanted it to be collateral. I don't want to keep living inside either man's version of what this house means. I'm choosing the foundation." The updated appraisal supported the sale price. Title Council confirmed the trust's authority to sell and required certified copies of the court order along with Cameron's contractual waiver. The sale moved through escrow. Taxes, fees, and reserves were all disclosed in writing. The net proceeds went into a protected account, held under the trust, for Natalie and Ivy. None of this happened in one dramatic night. It took weeks. During those weeks, Cameron called board members, investors, family friends, even Natalie's former co-workers. He described her as frightened, hormonal, manipulated by lawyers. He said her attorneys had talked her into selling a family landmark for less than it was worth. The chairman of Ellison Coastal Development asked outside counsel for the actual facts. They came in slowly. The notarization had been purchased through an online service, using an identity packet built from Natalie's stolen documents. The IP address traced back to a consultant working for Page. The forged clinic letter had been built from a template found on a company computer. The proposed loan money was set to pass through 2 related entities before landing in an account Cameron controlled. Forensic accountants discovered that Ellison Coastal Development was nearly $44 million short on unfinished projects. The loan wouldn't have saved the company, it would have covered the shortfall while putting Natalie's trust property at risk in its place. Page hired her own lawyer. She had genuinely believed Cameron meant to leave Natalie and build a life with her. Then her attorney showed her an email in which Cameron planned to pin the forged notarization on Page, fire her once the loan funded, and move the money into an offshore account she'd never be able to reach. Page went to investigators. The forensic search of the second phone only happened once legal process authorized it. Investigators made a verified copy, preserved the original, and logged everyone who handled it. The phone contained the After Ivy folder, messages about the forged trustee resolution, and recordings Page had made of Cameron, because she'd been afraid he would later deny giving those instructions. Natalie never got the phone back. Her lawyer received only what had been lawfully produced through the investigation and civil discovery. Closing day arrived under a hard blue sky. The sale carried a cost no closing statement could capture. Natalie had learned to swim off the eastern terrace of that house. Her mother had taught her to read blueprints at the dining table and calculate material waste on the backs of grocery receipts. During Evelyn's last winter, they'd sat by the library window and watched storms erase the horizon. "You don't owe a building your future," Evelyn had told her once, when Natalie worried about the upkeep. "A house should serve the people inside it. The moment people have to serve the house instead, something's gone wrong." Natalie had always taken that as advice about money. At closing, she understood it had also been advice about grief. Before she left the estate, she walked alone through the library. The shelves were bare except for a pencil mark inside a cabinet, where her mother had recorded Natalie's height at 8, 11, and 14. That mark wasn't part of the real property in any legal sense, but it mattered more to her than the bronze name outside ever had. She photographed it. She didn't cut it out of the cabinet or demand that Harbor Grace preserve every private memory in the house. Instead, the foundation agreed to keep the mark inside what would become the legal aid office. A small plaque there would name only Evelyn Dawson and the year she founded the trust. That was the difference between memory and ownership. Cameron had needed his name visible from the road. Natalie only needed to know the place would be useful again, without pretending it had never hurt her. Outside, the ocean wind lifted her hair. She rested both hands over Ivy and let herself cry, for the house, for the marriage she'd once imagined, and for the mother who had built protections she'd hoped her daughter would never need to use. Then Natalie wiped her face, gave the property manager her final instructions, and walked to the car without looking back. Natalie wore a pale wool coat and the flat black shoes her mother used to call sensible enough for any crisis. She signed the closing documents in a conference room overlooking the harbor. The Harbor Grace representative sat across from her, not celebrating, just confirming page after page. Once escrow confirmed the recording, Natalie went back to the estate one last time with the deputy and the property manager. She set Cameron's old key, the certified deed, the storage inventory, and his Thanksgiving place card inside the weatherproof box by the gate. The phone stayed in evidence. Natalie looked up at the bronze Ellison House sign. "Take it down once he's been notified," she said. The property manager nodded. Natalie left in a rental car booked under her legal name and drove to a furnished house outside Burlington, Vermont, owned by a former colleague. Her address stayed protected where the court allowed it. She hadn't vanished from the legal process, her lawyers knew exactly where she was, her doctors knew, the court knew how to reach her. She had only vanished from Cameron's control. An hour after she crossed the state line, Mara called. "He's coming back early." Natalie watched snow blow across the windshield. "Is the order in place?" "Yes." "Are the deputy and the property manager there?" "Yes." "Then I'm moving forward." Cameron reached the gate before sunset. By then the deed was recorded, the possession order was active, his belongings were in storage, and the bank had already suspended the loan. He stood and watched as workers pulled his name down one letter at a time. He called Paige. "You picked the wrong notary," he said. "You picked the service. Delete the folder. The police already have the phone." Cameron lowered his voice. "We can still shape how this looks." Paige laughed once. "Can you even still afford my lawyer?" She hung up. The special board meeting happened 4 days later, not a public spectacle, but a corporate emergency. Outside counsel reminded every director that an investigation wasn't the same as a conviction. Their job was to think about access, governance, preservation, and whether the company would survive. Cameron walked into the glass conference room in a navy suit. He called the forged records incomplete planning documents. He said Natalie's lawyers had turned a private marital dispute into a manufactured business crisis. He called Paige a disgruntled employee and the missing funds a matter of intercompany timing. The directors listened. Then the chairman turned on the screen. Natalie appeared, calling in from Mara's office. She was 39 weeks pregnant, exhausted, and completely steady. Cameron's voice softened. "Natalie. Come home. We can protect Ivy from this." Natalie looked straight at the camera. "I didn't disappear," she said. "I moved somewhere you can't reach." Outside counsel walked through the verified findings. The trust property had never belonged to the company. The bank had received disputed documents. The clinic denied ever evaluating Natalie, and the proposed transfers didn't match any approved project use. Paige came in with her own attorney and sat at the far end of the table. Her lawyer didn't stage a dramatic reveal, he simply confirmed that Paige was cooperating under an agreement with investigators and had authorized company counsel to review specific records through a controlled process. One recording caught Cameron saying, after the delivery, "She'll be exhausted. If she pushes back, people will believe the medical letter before they believe her." Another caught him planning to use Natalie's trust as temporary collateral, move the loan proceeds, and leave Paige holding responsibility for the paperwork. Paige stared at him. "You were going to erase both of us." Cameron stood up. "That's privileged marital material." Outside counsel answered, "Whether that's true will be litigated by the people entitled to litigate it. Today, this board is deciding whether you keep control of company systems and funds." The chairman called for the vote. Cameron was placed on administrative leave. His credentials, signing authority, and access to the bank accounts were suspended. A special committee of independent directors took over. Outside counsel secured the servers and brought in forensic accountants. Emergency financing covered payroll and active construction sites while the company negotiated with its lenders. Natalie asked for one thing. "Don't fire people just because they worked near him," she said. "Look at what they actually did, not who they stood next to." The chairman agreed. No one applauded as security walked Cameron out. Removing a chief executive wasn't a verdict, it was a boundary drawn around ongoing risk. Natalie ended the video call and sat still for a moment. Mara closed her laptop. "You did well." Natalie exhaled. "I'm tired of doing well in emergencies." A tightening moved across her stomach. She waited. Another one came 8 minutes later. Mara glanced at the clock. "Is that what I think it is?" Natalie let out a small, surprised laugh. "I think Ivy has her own schedule." Labor built gradually over the following hours. At the hospital, staff followed Natalie's own instructions about visitors and care. Cameron's lawyers were notified through the family court attorneys. A judge issued a temporary order allowing supervised contact after the birth while a custody evaluator reviewed the alleged threats, the forged medical records, and both parents' circumstances. At 2:46 the next morning, Ivy Grace Dawson was born healthy under soft hospital lighting. Her cry was small and fierce. Natalie held her against her chest and watched her tiny back rise and fall. "You're safe," she whispered. Not a promise that nothing hard would ever happen again, but a promise that whatever came next wouldn't be hidden under someone else's authority. The investigations dragged on for months. Prosecutors eventually charged Cameron with bank fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy, identity-related offenses, and making false statements to influence a financial institution. He pleaded not guilty at first. Later, once the court ruled on the evidence and his former associates agreed to testify, he took a negotiated plea on several counts. A federal judge set the sentence. Paige pleaded guilty to a lesser charge and received a reduced sentence in exchange for substantial cooperation. She didn't come out of it as anyone's hero, she accepted responsibility for the choices that had hurt Natalie, and she'd only helped investigators after realizing Cameron intended to betray her too. Ellison Coastal Development survived under independent management. Failing projects were sold off, lenders restructured the debt, and buyers were given honest completion timelines. The company took Cameron's name off its headquarters. Employees who had followed the rules kept their jobs. Those who'd knowingly falsified records faced consequences of their own. 6 months later, Natalie went back to real estate risk analysis. She worked out of a quiet office near Burlington and only took on projects that let her be home before Ivy's bedtime. She bought a small white house with blue shutters, no sweeping staircase, no plaque at the gate, no dining room built for a board retreat. But every key in it belonged to her. Harbor Grace reopened the coastal estate the following Thanksgiving. The old guest rooms became transitional apartments. Cameron's study became a legal aid office. The nursery became a counseling and childcare room. The dining room held one long table where residents, attorneys, volunteers, and children ate side by side. Natalie went to the opening only after the first family had already settled into an apartment of its own. She walked through the entryway and paused where the bronze plaque used to be visible from the windows. A new sign stood by the gate, Harbor Grace House. Safety. Counsel. A way forward. No family name appeared above it. That evening, Natalie carried Ivy back to their small house. Snow started after sunset. Ivy sat in her high chair, banging a wooden spoon against the tray, while Natalie warmed up leftover chicken and sweet potatoes. 2 plates sat on the table. No decorative third setting. No empty chair held for a promise that was never coming back. Natalie kept Cameron's old Thanksgiving place card in a drawer, beneath the final divorce decree. Not as a trophy, but as proof that one empty seat had once made her believe she was alone. She knew better now. Cameron believed that losing his name off the gate was the moment he lost everything. But a name stamped in metal had never created love, ownership, or truth. His real mistake had happened years earlier, when he spent so long teaching Natalie to doubt herself that he never once considered what would happen once independent people started checking the dates, following the money, and actually listening when she spoke for herself. Natalie's recovery was never perfect. During the divorce, Cameron challenged the trust sale, the possession order, and parts of the evidence. Some of his arguments were thrown out. Others dragged on through hearings and negotiated settlements. The family court approved a structured parenting plan only after evaluators had reviewed both parents, the pending criminal case, and what Ivy actually needed. Natalie didn't get every condition she asked for, and Cameron didn't lose every parental right just because he'd been a terrible husband. The court kept punishment and the child's best interests as separate as it could manage. That distinction was hard for Natalie to accept, but she respected it. She'd spent years with a man who treated authority as something he personally owned. She didn't want a legal system that simply handed that same unchecked authority to her instead. Once supervised contact began, neutral professionals handled every exchange. Natalie never met Cameron in a parking lot, and she never used Ivy to pass messages between them. Every change went through the parenting coordinator or the court. Boundaries became boring, documented, predictable, the exact opposite of the marriage. By Ivy's first birthday, Natalie could hear Cameron's name without feeling the room tilt. She didn't forgive him in order to heal. She simply stopped letting his choices take up every part of her day. The drill had taken his name down one letter at a time. Natalie had taken back her own life one careful decision at a time. And unlike that plaque, she was never going back up. She hadn't won by being louder than Cameron. She'd won the right to live without ever again letting his voice decide what counted as fact, what counted as law, or what the limits of her own judgment were. In the life she built afterward, the truth no longer needed Cameron's permission before she could act on it.